Everybody say, by faith. Oh, say it like you mean it. By faith. Man, if you're a follower of Jesus, let me tell you, you have been called to live this life by faith. Now, I know that that can be sort of mystical, right? Before I really got into God and got into church, and maybe you're here and that's sort of your story. You're not a big God fan. You lost a bet and now you're here. And one of the things that I had to struggle with was this whole by faith thing. I didn't understand it, I didn't really get it. Everybody was like, "Well, you got to live by faith," and I was like, "Well, how do I do that?" And they're like, "Well, it's not by sight," and I'm like, "Okay." So how do I do that? I was a very practical guy, and so when somebody told me, I need to live my life with a blindfold on, I didn't know how to really flesh that out in my life. I was doing construction at the time, and I was pretty sure that my foreman did not want me running equipment with a blindfold on. And but here's the thing is I really do believe that all of us, as we begin to navigate towards Jesus, and some of us are in the room and you're following God right now. Some of us are in the room and you're sort of questioning that, and we're glad that you're here. Some of you in the room and you're completely against this whole thing. You're just coming just to sort of see what's going on. And let me tell you something, we're glad you're here too. But as we begin to ask questions about who God is, there is an element of faith, and I would say a big element of faith that comes into play there. Because how many know, I don't know about you, but I've never seen God physically. I just haven't. And so there takes an element of faith to believe in a God of the universe. And listen, we can pretend that that's not real, but that's just real, right? I mean, it takes an element of faith just to believe in gravity, right? But we see the effects of gravity, right? But I can't touch gravity. Wind is sort of the same thing. We see the effects of wind, but I can't really bottle up wind and take it in my pocket. So we started this series last week, and it's talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Sarah, and it's found in Genesis. So if you have a Bible and you want to go to there, Genesis is the first book of the Bible. It's the easiest thing to find right after the table of contents. You want to go there. We're going to start off in Genesis. I am going to read a verse in Hebrews. You don't have to go there yet, but we're all going to start off in Genesis. But last week we talked about what does it look like to follow God's plan for our life. Now, to fill you in, to give you the backstory, the catch-up version, Abraham and Sarah are old. This is last week. They're old. Abraham's 100, Sarah's not far behind. They've been trying to have kids for years. Eventually, there comes to a place where, you hit like your 99th birthday and you're sort of going, maybe it's not going to happen. Well, about that time, God shows up to Abraham and says, "Hey, you're going to have a son." And Abraham, in his reverence to God, responds so honestly and just laughs. He laughs at God because we would too. Like, seriously, I'm 100. Like, I'm not having a kid. He visits him again, and outside of a tent, Sarah's eavesdropping. Let's just call it what it is. She's at the door of the tent listening in. And God tells Abraham again, Sarah's going to have a baby. And Sarah laughs. And then she got caught laughing. The angels are like, "Hey, why did you laugh?" And she's like, "I didn't laugh." Like, "Yeah, you did laugh." And one of the questions asked there is there anything too hard for God? And I think this is a question we could ask ourselves every day. I think every day we come up against things in our life that seem impossible. I think even in our own lives, when we try to search out and find a vision, what is God calling me to do and why am I on this planet? I think so many times we limit a God that is limitless. And so we have a very small view of ourselves. We have a very small view of the vision of God for our lives. So we limit it just to, well, I guess I'm just called to be a teacher. I guess I'm just called to be a construction worker. Well, I'm just called to be whatever. And I really do believe that maybe that is part of the calling of God on your life, but maybe that is not all the calling of God on your life. Because I really believe that God, not only is he the biggest thing in the room, but his vision for you is far greater and far bigger than you can ever imagine. See, he doesn't just create people to create people because he has nothing to do. Psalm 139 says, "You're fearfully and wonderfully made." He crafted you and created you in a secret place for a reason. And so today we're going to jump into this whole thing about living by faith. See, if God tells us not to fear, then living by faith is believing who he is and what he said. So if he tells us not to fear, guess what? We have to do our best to live this life without fear, leaning on him, right? When God encourages us to not only live a life worth living, but also encourages us to look at the word like Psalm 139, "You're fearfully and wonderfully made," we should start living as if that is true. Do you find yourselves living sometimes contradictory to what God has spoken over you? There are times I don't live fearfully and wonderfully made. I just don't. There are times I live like a punk. I have a low view of myself. I have a low view of what I do. I have a low view of, and you ever get in those moments where you start spiraling? right? You start going I always call it the dark side, right? You start spiraling out of control. If God is who he is, and then we have to believe what he said. That's one of the marks of the believer, is living out our lives by faith. Hebrews 11:1 says this. It says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction or the evidence of things unseen. It says, now faith is the assurance. It's being sure of something, confident of something. The assurance of things hoped for. And is the conviction of things not seen. See, here's the thing. We walk by faith. We live by faith. We are saved by grace through faith, and we are justified by faith. Let me tell you something. There are times in your life, honestly, where you're living contradictory to the things that you see in the natural. Let me explain this. There have been times in my life where there has been immediate danger. And for some odd, I don't want to say for some odd reason, I know what it is. As I live by faith and believe in a God who's stronger than my circumstance, believe in a God who protects and provides, guess what? I'm able to navigate those situations with less fear than anyone else in the room. It's not because of who I am, it's because of who he is. Do you understand that? There's nothing special about me. I know that's hard to believe, but there is nothing special about me. The only thing great about my life is that God has rescued it. The only thing great about my life is that God is in it. The only reason I am excited about the gospel, the only reason I'm excited about what I do is because I know that it is a gift from God that he has given me, and I get to play along. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than my family. It's funny how we try to live this life for God aside from faith. Isn't it interesting? So many times we try to do this life without God. I can just do it myself. Really? Because I've tried that. It didn't work out too good for me. I don't need God. I can beat this addiction by myself. Are you sure? I don't need God. I can do this life without friends. Are you sure? Because like I said before, I went to bed a lot of times lonely, hopeless. One of our core values is don't do life alone. Listen, that's one of our core values, but that's a biblical thing. Nowhere in the Bible do I see God encouraging people just to live this life isolated from everyone. So jumping into what we're going to talk about today, there's your long introduction. So God tells Abraham and Sarah, hey, you're going to have a child. The child's going to be Isaac. By faith, they believe this. They believe what God said was true. Even though they don't understand it. That's two different things, by the way. Just because you're walking by faith doesn't mean you have all the answers. Doesn't mean you understand everything. They believe it, even though they don't see it yet. But it comes true. And it comes down to this verse. I love this. And we said this before, but it's at Genesis 18:14. God says, is anything too hard for the Lord? And I love what he says. He sort of like throws out the gauntlet. He says, at the appointed time, I will return to you. And about this time next year, and Sarah, you will have a son. How many know when God says things, he's not like us? I'll be there at 8. If you're not timely, always use the phrase, ish. I'll be there at 8-ish. See, God doesn't use the phrase ish. God doesn't go, hey, I'll pay for your sins ish. Only the things that, not the real bad stuff. I love you a little-ish. When God says things, he means things. And we'll see that here in a minute. See, when we begin to follow God and venture into our faith, this is the question we have to answer all the time is this bigger than God? Is this bigger than God? Is this bigger than who he is and what he can do? We said this last week, is that God is the biggest thing in the room in your life. God is the biggest thing. And so anytime you come up to a situation, whether that's a business situation, a church situation, a faith situation, a family situation, a relationship deal, whatever it is, when you come up against that, what you need to do, because you will naturally go to fear, you will naturally go to the probable. What you got to do is navigate towards the possible. Well, the Bible says there's nothing impossible with God. See, God never changes, and God's vision for all of us is uncontainable. But I do believe that it's our doubt and our laughter that keeps us on the sideline. Because some of us are hearing that right now, right? You're like, okay, wait, I get it. You're saying God's vision for me is bigger than myself. Great, but why isn't it happening? I think that's a question that you may have to answer yourself. Because I think so many times what keeps me from walking into things that God has called me to do has nothing to do with God, but has a lot to do with me. It has to do a lot with my willingness and my surrender. It has a lot to do with me getting off my butt and putting feet to my faith. It has a lot to do with me silencing the laughter and just being honest with God and go, though I don't understand it or see it yet, I will step out of the boat. It's interesting that Peter, he did not, all Peter needed to step out of the boat was a voice from Jesus saying, come. And he went. Now, I don't know how he got out. I'm not going to psychoanalyze that at all. But he doesn't seem like he ever questioned if the water was going to get hard. He just stepped out. I think some of us are in that place in our life today. There are decisions and things that you're up against. And I would encourage you, trust God. Oh, preaching myself today. So here's the thing. So what happens when we take God at his words? What happens when we begin to live this life by faith? See, even though Sarah and Abraham couldn't see the promise that God had for them or what effect it would have on the world, they stepped out into belief and it came to pass. The birth of Isaac reminds us, right, that as we serve God, well, let me just read this. In Genesis chapter 21, verse 1, I love this. This is so cool. And maybe you don't get it, but I've been reading this all the way. It says, the Lord visited Sarah as he said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he promised. Man, there is something about God where I think he's got a little attitude sometimes. He's like, I told you he was going to have a baby. Boom, you had a baby. I told you I was going to come back, and now I'm back. I told you. I love that. The Lord visited Sarah as he said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he promised. See what God said he's going to do. See, sometimes sometimes all we have is what God is calling us to. Sometimes all we have is like God sharing a vision or sharing a dream or sharing something he's calling us to or an opportunity or whatever. There's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of space to be like, man, I don't know if this is God. But if we'll dare to step out in faith in our life and those, and how many of you fear failure and that's why you don't step out in faith a lot of times? Let's just be honest. You feel fear. Yeah, right. The rest of you are liars. So you fear failure, right? I hate failing. I was a horrible student in school and I failed constantly. I hate failing in life. I just hate it. I hate making decisions that I know could have possible major fallout if they're not the right decision. So I hate failing, but I'll tell you what that does to all of us. It paralyzes us and keeps us on the bench. It paralyzes you from taking a step out in the faith. So me and Carly, when we left Mississippi, a full-time ministry gig that we were just excited about, and God called us up here with no ministry opportunity, and I was going to go bang hammers with my father-in-law and build houses. Let me tell you, everybody in my family did this thing, right? Are you sure? Are you sure? My oldest brother, I hope he's watching. My oldest brother took me aside like older brothers do. He acts like 12,000 years older than what he is. You know you do. He took me aside, put his arm around me, and goes, you okay? Yeah, man, I'm good. You sure you're good about this? Yeah, I'm good about this. I had even some family members go, let me get this right. So you went to ministry school, you graduated, full-time in the ministry, now you're quitting, moving 2,000 miles north to go build houses with no ministry. Yep. The only thing that kept us is that we felt like God was calling us here. Let me tell you something. We were here for 10 years before God sort of gave us the next step, which is this. 10 years. You may say, man, that's a long time. No, it's not really. What can happen when we begin to step out in faith is that we get a chance to bring forth Isaacs in our life. We get a chance to see the dreams and the visions that God has given us to come out and to be fleshed out, much like Abraham and Sarah had this child at such an old age. Again, like I said, that could be a vision, that could be a promise. I want to just use our church as an illustration. There's a picture, if you got that, Nate, you want to put that up here. I don't know if you can see this real well. This is where Element Church started. This is the library in town, and we didn't have that many chairs. Don't get too excited. There were probably about 25, 30 people there. There came a time in our lives where we believed God was calling us to do something different, and it was very different. It was sort of different, like uncomfortable to Carly and I. And I'll be quite honest with you, I looked to go do it somewhere else. I was on staff at a church here in town, great church in town, gave me a great opportunity, me and my wife. And as God was calling us out, again, I resigned ministry for full time. Like, why would I do that? I did it again just to go back and sling hammers. And the whole time, God had birthed something in Carly and I that was much like an Isaac. It was something that we sort of thought was impossible. And on a Sunday night, February 6, 2011, we met for the first time in here, and the Isaac became sort of fleshed out. And it was rigid and awkward. You know what I mean? And if you're part of Element Church, you're like, well, not much has changed. Because we're true to our vision. You know, it wasn't all put together. It was just a bunch of people getting together. And believe it or not, there's a 96-second clip of that message that I shared there. And that's it. That's all that exists from that time. But all we had was a vision. All we had was a vision to do church differently. We saw a lot of our friends in their 20s and younger and even in their 30s just checking out. It's not that they didn't like God, but they just didn't like church. How many you went through that? I just don't like church. Like, I like God, but just the church thing gets on my nerves. And so we were just like, hey, what would happen if we began to disciple people? Listen, we had no money. And a lot of people in our community were skeptical, and I'll be honest with you. So, I would have been really skeptical of something like this. But I say that to say this, is that when we talk about living a life by faith, I want you to know that every time you come and you sit in the seat, every time you watch online, every time you engage in a community out, every time you go to a community group, you are part of something that began like that. And the reason I tell you that is because I think so many times, again, fear and anxiety can keep us on the bench. And I just want to give you permission. Listen, you're part of a movement that started like that. It's part of our DNA. It's part of who we are. We will always push you to the limit to step out in faith in some area of your life. We'll always tell you to do that. Always. Always. Because we're always coming back to the question, is this too big for God? Is it? In Genesis 21, 1-7, I love this. He says, the Lord visited Sarah as he said he would, right? And the Lord did to Sarah as he promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Perfect timing. In verse 3, he says, Abraham called the name of his son, who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. In verse 6, I love this. And maybe this is where you are in your life. In verse 6, and Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Isaac means laughter. God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in my old age. Let me tell you something. What God is calling you to do with your life may make you laugh. And it may be pretty bizarre. But there'll come a time, if we'll step out in faith and follow Jesus, that others will laugh. But they won't laugh in disbelief. They'll laugh in the miraculous. They'll laugh because they're like, are you serious? Let me tell you something. Every time I walk into this room, every time I go to the community group, every time I look at Element Church, I'm going, are you serious? Morgan and I were talking. Morgan and Mike were the first ones to sit at our table, went through the book of Mark. It was just one couple that we started and just began to disciple them. And it's funny, Morgan said this week. Like, would imagine that we'd be sitting here in an office like talking about the future, talking about making disciples, talking about reaching our community. Did you ever think that it would go from a kitchen table to this? And I went, not in a billion years. Not in a billion years. See, there's a reason that God waits for the impossible timing to do things. Because here's the thing, if he doesn't, you can take all the credit and all the glory. There's a reason why he waits for the impossible time. This sort of transfers over to Mary, the mother of Jesus. She was a virgin. With Sarah, he waited till it was like she was old and she couldn't, right? It was like impossible that way. With Mary, what'd she do? She just did it right before she ever had sex. She was a virgin. I think God gets a lot of joy out of doing the miraculous. I love this. Hebrews 11:6 says this, and without faith it's impossible to please God, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he's a rewarder to those who seek him. If you ever want to put a smile on God's face, step out in faith in some area of your life. If you ever want to put a smile on his face, step out in faith in an area of your life. What do you believe God's calling you to do? And some of us are in the room and you're like, well, mine's just a business idea that I really can't get out of my head. And I keep dreaming about it. Well, do you ever think that maybe God's like impressing that on your life? Some of you are students. And you're like, you know what? There are people in my homeroom. There are people that I've been hanging out with this summer that really, I just sort of feel like I need to just go and talk to, or I need to befriend. Don't belittle that. You students, don't you dare have this conversation in your head, well, I'll just wait till I get older. Listen, we can't afford for you to wait till you get older. We can't. Don't wait. That's ridiculous. Well, my parents will do it. No, they won't. No, they won't. They're not going to reach your friends. You're going to reach your friends. Let's be honest. Do we really want our parents trying to reach our friends anyway? You can shake your head gently. It's okay. Don't wait till you get older. Well, I don't know enough. What do you know? I know that God loves me and that if you follow him, if you commit your life to him, then you're born again. Well, start there. Hebrews 11:11, by faith Sarah had herself received power to conceive, even when she was past her age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. All right, closing up. Here, check this out. I need everybody, even those who are watching us online, I need you to have this conversation this week, is what is God calling you to do with your life? Now, you don't have to have this 12-year plan. It doesn't work, by the way. I had a 5-year plan that I pitched to my dad. I think the first 8 months worked, but that's only because I knew that I already had the job that I told him, and I was married. So I knew that was going to work. The other 4 years and 2 months or 3 months didn't work out. But I think what we need to ask ourselves is, what is God saying? See, you may be hearing God speak into your life, but it's what are you going to do with that? Some of you are saying, hey, I can't hear God say anything. And this is where this comes into play. Because he's always speaking here. He's always speaking in the Bible. We have Bibles over there. You take them. Well, you only got one left. We don't care. We love buying Bibles. That's what we do. It's fun. You need to take this. Download it on your phone. Well, where do I start? Start in the Gospels, where there's red letters. He's always talking. See, this is the thing. I think, unfortunately, we're outmoding this. We're outmoding the Bible, and that's why we're not hearing God speak. Don't outmode this. Don't outmode this. You need this. I need this. Listen. What is he saying? You may be on the verge of stepping out into something scary, and I just want to tell you this. God never leaves us or forsakes us. Some of you, God is talking about things in your life right now. Those are lifestyle changes or things that are going on. I'm going to tell you something. Step out in it. He'll never leave you or forsake you. I had one thought when I crossed over the Tennessee line when I was coming up to Wisconsin, and the one thought was this. If I made a mistake, God will still love me. That one thought I had changed my whole attitude, changed my whole demeanor. What is God calling you to do? I would say this. Remember that the promise has potential. See, what we don't recognize is the reason Isaac was so important is because God said this in Genesis 17:6. He said, I will establish my covenant with him, Isaac, an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. When you look at Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 1, verse 2, the lineage of Jesus, guess who it starts with? Abraham and Isaac. Understand this, that the vision that God may be giving you, you could probably only see about 20 feet in front of you. You really think that Abraham had it figured out that the Messiah would come through his son? No, you're crazy. He's smart. He wasn't that smart. Abraham didn't figure that out. All Abraham knew is that there was an everlasting covenant. He couldn't. I don't think Abraham knew the whole process. I don't think Abraham knew that this whole thing would work out and the Messiah would come from his son. Right at that moment, I don't think Abraham knew anything. I think Abraham's whole head was wrapped around, I'm 100 years old. How in the world is this going to happen? Right? God never lies. He never changes. And what he's calling you to do can have an everlasting effect on the community and the world that you live in. So be bold. Step out. Take a chance. See if the water gets hard. And guess what? If you sink, take a little advice from Peter. Call out to Jesus. And guess what? He always rescues. Stand with me. Stand with me.